Thank you for joining us this lovely Friday afternoon, and welcome to today's Ask an Expert. We're really forward to getting stuck into this session. Just before we begin, some small housekeeping notes. If you could please remain on mute throughout the presentation, just so we can keep outside distractions to a minimum, that would be great. However, if you do have a question, please feel free to raise your hand or to utilise the chat function, as we really do encourage your engagement and participation throughout the session. I'll now pass you on to Phil just to take you through all things related into best practice for PPM and reporting. Thanks, Phil.
Thanks, Alice. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us today. So I'm going to run through our Ask an Expert webinar. This is my second one I've done in our series. Today we're going to look at an overview of the PPM solutions, and I'm going to try and point out for you where, for new implementations or for current implementations even, where to find value in that in the tool. Some common mistakes to avoid, potentially letting out some industry secrets, so hopefully that's somewhat interesting for you, and then how to leverage reporting along with that as well. So hopefully it's of some interest to you today. As Alice said, if you've got questions as we go along, just shout out or chuck them in the chat. We'll leave some time for questions at the end as well. My name's Phil Eilenberg. I'm the delivery manager for Victoria. I lead our delivery team. I have about 10 years of experience deploying PPM solutions, focusing mostly on the Microsoft side of things. I've done a whole range of different implementations, so trying to touch on my experience with that today, going from really small implementations on one end through to some of the enterprise level and really large and complex implementations on the other end of the extreme. So hopefully you find this session today valuable. We'll leave some time for interaction at the end, and as always after the session today, if you have anything, you can always reach out to us at Sensei. So what we're going to run through today, so we're going to do a quick overview of PPM, so to have a look at what we're actually talking about, so everyone is on the same page. I won't spend too long on this because hopefully if you are joining us today, that you have a fair idea of what we're talking about, the areas of interest to you, so hence why you joined. But I'll just set the scene with what we're covering. I'm going to look at 3 key areas where you can find value in an implementation. For those who have already gone through their initial implementation, I'll also go to things that you might look for your next step, or where you could potentially look to add value as your next phase and where to move on to. I'll also touch on then 3 common areas and common mistakes to avoid, things where I find less value in terms of our solutions, and where people often get stuck down in rabbit holes. I'll touch on some of the reporting and Power BI standards and how we utilize Power BI throughout the solutions, hopefully giving you a good idea of how that's functioning in a modern workforce and how we're starting to use that in a little bit more valuable way. And I will leave some time for questions at the end. Great. All right, so I've got a lot to go through today. As I do go through, I'm going to touch on a few different areas. If there's anything that you wanted to jump into, like I said, raise your hand as we go through, or additionally, have a capture of what we're talking about, either the screen or the name of the page, and we can always come back to it. But to start with, I'm going to do an overview of PPM just to get everyone on the same page. So for those who are new to Sensei, and I think everyone on the call may have dealt with us a bit in the past, but Sensei is a project and portfolio management tool implementation partner. We partner with Microsoft to align to the Office 365 stack and to best leverage what you already have got in your Office 365 environment. So what that's looking for in terms of PPM is having a solution that we can track projects and our portfolio as a whole. Now I'm going to try and change some screens up of what I'm sharing, so bear with me for 1 second. Let's change this one to this one. All right. So in terms of our PPM products, I'm going to try and keep today's demonstration a bit agnostic on tools. So you may have a solution that looks similar to this in terms of our IQ product, based on CDS and model-driven apps in the Power Platform, or you might still be aligned to more of a process or a tool set that looks a bit like this one. If you are aligned to the Product Online and Microsoft Project solution stack based on the SharePoint side of things. So when we're looking at product and portfolio management, or our PPM tools, it doesn't really matter what functionality or technology we're based on. They should all really do the same thing, and that's what I'm going to really focus on today in terms of general functionality, not specific tool sets that give different outcomes or different functions based on where they're built on. So I will go through, I guess, a couple of different options today, showing a couple of different screens we go through, but in terms of our PPM, we are looking at having all of our projects in the one place and having a central source of truth to try and track all of our projects and project information. So looking at high level views and then jumping into kind of a lower level project view of how we track our day-to-day product information, and giving the PM group and our PMs a way and a tool to enter information and track that through the life of the project. All right, so as a bit of a PPM overview, hopefully that gives us a good common understanding of what we're going to discuss through today. I'm going to dive into some of these key areas. So we're going to have our first poll. So question for you, what do your PMs use to create their project status report? So we're talking about on a weekly or monthly basis, what are PMs creating your PSR in, the project status report? Are you looking at, and let me share the other screen for a second. Let's go. And we're going to put this one up. So in terms of PPM usage, so are you using PowerPoint? Is everyone still putting together PowerPoint packs for their PM reports? Are we using Excel workbooks? Do you have some crazy funky thing that you're doing, massive Excel workbooks with macros running in the background? Have you got the old Word document or even a Notepad document you're putting some generic text into? Or are you doing a system generated report where you have either Power BI or SSRS or another technology being utilized for reporting? Or is it something else altogether? So we've got some responses coming through. So it looks like we've got PowerPoint about 14%, Excel about 20%, Word about 20%, system generated 40%. So that's really good to see that a lot of our Sensei clients are on the call, so you are using system generated reports. So I'd be a little bit worried if we had a lot of responses that weren't aligned to this, although very interesting still that we've got 12%, 17% and 20% on PowerPoint, Excel and Word. So a good spread of responses there. It does lead me into my first point of where we can find real value in the tool, and it's no kind of secret that we are going to be touching on ensuring we have system generated reports being produced for the project. So about 43% of people aligned to this at the moment. So the three key areas I'm going to touch on for this section is how to find real value from your project tool and where we see a lot of the value from our implementations and where they should be focused to get some good business value out of it at the end. This first one is going to be status reports. So leading on from our poll, where we find a lot of value from status reporting from the tool. I'm going to touch on some financial integration, so some basic financial integration, and also my last one is collaboration and visibility in the tool. So I'm going to dive into status reports first, why it's really important to have our view of status reporting in our product solution and what that value will provide to your end customers, so your executive group or potentially your organization as a whole, how that'll actually add value. So I don't like to spend too much time in PowerPoint slides, so I'm going to share some more demos of different areas as we go through. So I'm going to start with this one. All right, hopefully that's coming through from everybody. So when we implement our PPM solutions, there is a process I like to advise in terms of getting our status reports created. Now, what our portfolio status report should look like is something like this one. So we're trying to have a full list of projects with a full complete data set showing that gives us a real-time view of project progress to date and an accurate view of how everything is progressing. Now, this portfolio report is probably what I see as one of the best outcomes of the tool as a view, and our whole purpose of this tool is really to see how everything is tracking and where everything is up to. So we can use this portfolio dashboard to give a good insight into our general information of where products are up to. Now, to get to this point takes a lot of steps along the way, along our journey, to be able to produce this in an accurate and repetitive process. I'm going to work through how I generally advise to create this as our endpoint is a portfolio status report, and how our project status report aids in helping this be accurate and correct. So when we go through our implementation, we always get to a point where PMs are live in the tool and looking to create their or add information to their projects and create their first status report. I often advise that we go through a few months cycle or process in terms of adding information and making those status reports more and more accurate as we progress. So in the first month, and this doesn't really matter if you're doing weekly or fortnightly or monthly reporting cycles, in your first month, your full focus should be on having a complete set of projects in the tool. So a complete set of projects meaning we have defined from an organizational perspective what we think a project is and that what should be in a portfolio report. So our full list of projects. So it might be this view here, looking at a list of all of our projects in the one screen. It might be a view like this where we have all of our projects in Project Center. Again, creating a dashboard like this where we have our full list of projects. So first step is always to have a list of projects in the tool and it defined of that's our full scope of reporting. Our second month, once we have our defined set of projects, is to try and get a full and complete set of data. So this is a good example of how this isn't meant to work. You'll see there's missing traffic lights in here as an example. So we should really push, and this is a PMO admin focus to try and get all PMs and all projects to have a full and complete set of information. So in our IQ tool, we can see this a bit better. We do have all line items showing. We have product managers assigned to everything. We have finish dates assigned to everything. There's one line item here that has a couple of missing data points. So we can run through this and do some QA to find anything that's still missing for projects. But our second month of reporting should really be focused on making sure at least the PMs have touched on and gone through each different section in their project in the tool to make sure we have a complete data set to report on and that it's showing up in these reports. And now as we go through and build this up from a status report perspective, we have, whilst this is portfolio view, we have a couple of standard status reports we look at. So our IQ version of our product status report, or looking at a view of a status report that looks like this, if we dive through from a project portfolio level into a project level, so having a status report that looks like this is where we look to make sure PMs are focusing on adding information to complete every section in their project status report. From here, we grab everything that we've entered so far and we can roll this up to that portfolio or program level, but the starting point is always from a project level, making sure this is complete. So it does take some time, and as you would know, getting your PMs into the tool and adding complete information gives us a view to get this up to date and make sure it is actually completed for all our different sections. So this might be, it does take a while, so it might have a good focus on having things like your risks and issue lists of making sure everyone's had a chance to go through them, they've been reviewed, and they have a full set of information. So in this view, we've got things like our risks and issues coming through as well. We can see this is a good example of a product that has a full list of information added. Once we've added a complete set of data to our project, our next step is going to be scheduling and trying to get a baseline schedule. So this one's a really hard one, and so this would be our third month of focus, is to try and get scheduling somewhat accurate and somewhat representative of a real-time situation and reflect reality of the project. Now, as you know from a Microsoft Product perspective and in Product Online, where we looked at having a Microsoft Product schedule behind things, it is quite complex, and that maturity for PMs to get up to speed with how their projects are tracking from a scheduling perspective does take some time. It does take a bit of maturity to get your scheduling correct, but there is a huge advantage to having this done correctly. So we do focus a lot of training at this and assisting with PMs to get their schedules done right. If you do have a schedule that's accurate, it means the PM has at least gone through their project end to end, thought about the different tasks that need to be done, separated into time frame, potentially added resources, and even gone to a cost profile to align to that as well. It just means that you've at least thought about the project end to end. You've had a bit of a plan in terms of your timeframes and your sequencing of tasks, whether it is from Microsoft Project or it's in your project for the web or whichever element you are scheduling in, but you've at least planned out your different phases, stages, and the timeframes around that. If you can have your schedule updated, it means that things like this, dashboards like this, will be very much more valuable to the reader. You can see ours is in our demo environment isn't particularly good. We have projects which are in the past which haven't been updated, they're not complete. It means we don't have reliable information in here. From our other view, we can see things like our project milestones, and this is coming from a project for the web schedule, where we've got project milestones that have been complete recently and upcoming milestones that are coming up. And again, we've got some items that should have been finished that aren't finished. So we need to look at updating these tasks to make sure they're accurate. We should have a view of all upcoming milestones being in the future, being a future task. So again, from a executive level or a senior ELT view of the tool, this provides great benefit in that you know what's recently been done and you know what is coming up in the near future for progress through either deliverables or milestones or tasks that are being worked on without going into the project and finding out what everyone else is up to. It should be a good and accurate view of what's happened and where everything is progressing. So having accurate schedules, and the next point of that is having a baseline schedule so you can track variance away from where you're meant to be to where you are now, is going to add a huge amount of value in terms of your reporting output. And it'll be the third month's focus in trying to maintain or trying to get to that point of accurate portfolio reporting. So having everything accurately updated in your schedule, in your projects for your project status report leads to having I want to go back here. So a accurate view of progress in our project portfolio view, and also accurate finish dates as well. So again, adding to the accuracy of what information this is providing. And our last focus for this is to ensure that this process is continuously repeated each week or each month, depending on your report cycle. And we'll touch a little bit today on how report cycles should work. But to have this as accurate as possible throughout the month as well. So this should give you a real-time view of project progress. If your PMs are in that process of only updating their status report and their project once a month, only for reporting purposes, we're losing a whole chunk of value that we are trying to get in the tool of having a view of where everything is up to, rather than just that 1 month update for checking in and PMs entering information just for reporting purposes. We need to have it as a real tracking tool for how everything is going during the month as well. And we'll get to that a little bit later. So our fourth month and our process going forward from month 4 onwards is to have this repeatable. Once we have a consistent set of projects and project status reports in the tool, it means our portfolio report should be accurate, and we can start to do things like trend analysis. So as we are in a project, we can start to create status updates, and our status updates within each project will see past history of how our project has progressed from where it started, and we can track things like traffic lights which are getting worse, and then we've rectified them to get better. So again, the main focus for our tool is to be able to help PMs deliver a successful project by allowing them to see where they have come from and be able to apply get to green mitigation strategies. We can try to help the PM get their project back on track, and rather than just showing it is off track. So by having some trends of where we've come from and start to show these in some reports as well. So from our status report, we have trend indicators or arrows in here to show things that are getting worse and things that are getting better. By having a repeatable process, we can start to capture that. It gives the readers more depth into where things have come from and if they are getting worse or getting better towards a get to green environment. So in terms of our status reporting, this is my major #1 focus for actually receiving real value from your tool, is to make sure that PMs are accurately updating their status report on a weekly or regular basis. There's complete information, and this rolls up to a usable and a valuable dashboard for the executive team to consistently review. So that's my #1 item. The next one on our list is going to be our financial integration. So this is going to be my second key area to find value in our tool. The reason this provides a really high level, high value item for our project managers in particular is to remove the admin overhead for financial reporting each month. Now, coming from my project management background, this is something where I found there was a huge amount of admin required to update financial reports every month or in that reporting process. And the biggest part of that was getting a finance extract from the finance team and applying that to my project to update for where I'm up to. So when we're looking at financial tracking and reporting, we're looking at projects with the budget, an estimate complete or their forecast amount remaining, and what has actually come in so far, and trying to find a variance from that budget. So I know budget tracking and cost tracking for projects is more is a higher value item for some people and less valuable for others. But as we do go through, we want to try and ensure that our finance tracking is, again, as accurate as possible. And the easiest way to do that is to have an import of our actual data from the finance tool. Now, when we do our implementations, we often advise to push this out to a phase 2 type engagement, often due to budget constraints, but we can start to pull that in and make it easier by doing either higher level actuals being brought in from finance, or making it a bit easier for the finance team and the project team to work together to track actual amounts as you go through. So from a financial tracking perspective, we can have just a continually cumulative figure. So $180,000 has been spent to date on this one project, and next month as we update it, it becomes $200,000. So we see how much has been spent so far. We can update then how much we still think we have left on this project, and then we'll track against how much we think we're going to go over or under budget in this view. From an entry side, this looks like this, where we look at financials. And we're looking at a budget line item, a forecast line item for items in the future. So tracking what we think we're going to charge, or what the project is going to incur costs in the future, and then our actual line items from in the past. So as you can see here, my today date here, I should have actuals in the past, I should have forecasts in the future, and I'm tracking against my total budget to give me a variance across the bottom here as well. Now, the best process for this from a PM perspective to minimize that that admin overhead is for the tool to suck in actuals at either end of week or end of month, depending on your monthly or your financial reporting cycle. But as long as it's accurate and you're bringing in your financials to an actual line item, so that it shows actual spend to date. And again, it can be at the highest level, just total cumulative actuals to date, or we can break it down to actuals by line item and by month to give PMs a better view of their spend over time, and they can track against their forecast spend to make sure that they are staying on budget, or if they are pushing over or under budget, that you can start to rectify that ahead of time. So our biggest integration we do is with finance tools to bring in actuals. Occasionally we do push forecasts and other information back to finance. I find that less valuable. I think the highest value item you can do is bring in at least a high level actual figure for your projects on a regular basis. It gives you reliable financial information. There's never a point where you're questioning what your product tool is reporting and what your finance tool is reporting in terms of actuals or cost to date. You always have the same figure being reported in both systems. So importing and integrating your financial actuals into your project is a huge value add area. So that covers off our stats reporting, our financial integration. Our third area where we look to find real value is going to be in our collaboration and visibility. So this one's huge for this tool and this tool set in particular. This is kind of the whole reason why we do implement the tool set, is to give better visibility of projects throughout the organization and to allow collaboration on the projects as well, using the technology that we now have through Microsoft and particularly through Office 365. So this is kind of that view of having a Ferrari and leaving it in the garage. If we have a tool that we've implemented well and it is providing a lot of value, it makes sense to provide access to it to a lot of people and potentially the whole organization. Now, I am well aware that subscriptions and license costs do add up, so it's important to maintain an accurate set of those who will access the tool. Since they provide generally a enterprise agreement, so it's not per seat, so hopefully this makes it easier for you tracking or giving more access to the tool. But it's definitely a high value item to ensure a larger group of your organization have access to particularly reports and particularly the output that's being produced from the tool, and so that they can have a real-time view of what's going on, again, by having accurately and centrally maintained information, we should be able to send this out to a larger stakeholder group so they can find the information that's relevant to them and they can make decisions based on this data. The collaboration side of things, we want to make sure that also that the PM doesn't take on the full burden of their project update. So having the project team allocated, so as adverse to your ELT and having your executives having access, it also adds a lot of value to have your team members and your project team having access to the tool as well. They can have their own dashboard looking at things like my work and what's coming up for an individual. They can have a view of what's been allocated to them. And the biggest value I find is being able to share the administrative burden for updates to items. So things like risks that the project is tracking. If I have items that have been assigned to me as a risk item for my different projects that I'm working on, say as a BA or as a tester or as part of the project team, there'll be situations where I have more information about this particular item, maybe as an SME, than the project manager will. So I can come in here and update the mitigation plan for them to help to try and bring down that burden on the PM themselves updating it to instead allow the project team to help input this information. There's a question. Do you just want to jump in?
Yes, this is Avi Chandra. I'm curious how the distribution of the updates typically goes, because what I've found is that you almost cannot rely on your project team to update various things, and quite often you spend a lot of time chasing up updates. I'm curious about your thoughts on that.
Absolutely. So that goes into my point of increased visibility. So you would hope that the project team adding their updates are immediately visible to at least the whole team and the project manager themselves. So from my projects, I like to divvy out the items that I'd like people to work on, allow them to enter the tool and update themselves, then I have a chance to review. So in views like this and having a My Active Risks view where I can see what's allocated to me, I also have a reporting view from my perspective to see kind of what I've got on my plate from tasks and using risks as an example. Here are all the risks that I have so I can keep in control of this. But the PM has the same view of this for all of their project items. So it should be an increase in visibility, removes that unknown of what the team has and hasn't updated. So it should give you more control over what information has been entered and a chance to review that, and at least removing the admin overhead of entering the full set of information yourself. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, to some extent, the challenge I've had is that yes, you can divvy out the update responsibility, but people are just focused on doing their work and they actually don't update it. And so you end up spending quite a bit of time chasing up updates, especially if you're working in a distributed team. So that's one of the challenges I've had with actually distributing out the update is you often can't rely on people to update it and update it on a regular basis. So that it's kept up to date all the time.
Yep, absolutely. So Jeff, definitely a general worry and concern throughout project teams is making sure people are doing what they're meant to in a timely fashion. There are ways we can highlight those things. So things like allocating tasks, and if a task is meant to be completed and has passed that date, we can start to highlight those things. So there are ways that we can get around this to help see what has been actioned and what hasn't been. But yeah, then there's a general business process around that as well of making sure people have done their updates and made their contributions in a timely fashion. We can lean on PMO to also help out in this to try and do some QA over projects and to help the PMs find out where things might still be lagging behind. Hopefully that's all useful to you. So I do want to push on to go to our next section of areas where I choose to avoid and where I think I advise to not spend as much time and which are least value adding. And we do have a new poll question for this. So let me bring this one up over here. So for this poll, I'm going to ask, how many stage gates do your project frameworks have? And let's take, for example, here your most complex or your largest project and the largest project life cycle. So how many gates, and we're talking about a a project lifecycle, which stages and gates that you work through, how many approval points do you have, what does your project framework look like, are you going for a simple 1 or 2 gate process? Do you have 3 or 4? Have you got a larger one, 5, 6, 7, 8, or I've even seen some with 10 or more stage gates. So let us know how many gates you do have as part of your project framework. So a lot of responses coming through. We've got 9% for 1 or 2, so a couple with a really simple one. 3 or 4 looks like the most popular. We've got 60% coming there. 5 or 6 is about 30%. None for 7 or 8, and there's a few who are in that far end, with 3% being 9 or more. Awesome. So I really wanted to get a good gauge of the different types of project frameworks that we do have occurring throughout our different project life cycles. And I say this all the time. So part of our engagements and our workshops is to work through what your current stage and gate process looks like, and to gauge how your projects progress through those gates and through that process, to help your PMs better understand what hurdles they have to get through to get their project to the end and to closure. Now, what I find is that this, for a project stage gate process and your project framework as a whole, this is the most important area for a PMO to have a framework set and to track to that framework. It's the most important process for PMO to provide quality assurance at those gating levels, but this is the least useful piece of functionality to have in the system. And it's what I see quite frequently happen is we implement these crazy stage and gate frameworks. And as we've just seen from the poll, that everybody does theirs differently. So obviously there's a fairly standard project framework and SDLC and all that kind of things, trying to track around the right number of stages and gates. But everybody does it differently, and there are some crazy ones with 10 or more gates to get through. So this, again, is an area where I find a lot of time and cost is spent implementing stage and gate frameworks into the tool, which provides the least amount of value. And I'll run through this quickly in terms of our tool set as well, what this looks like. So when we are looking at our stage and gate process, it doesn't matter which tool we're looking at. We generally have a pretty standard view of how it progresses from a CDS or a model-driven app side. You can see we have a business process where we have a couple of tick box items to get through this gate. Going to execution, we have a couple of items to tick off to get through execution, and then again to closing. So to align to what I'm trying to advise here, our standard out-of-the-box products are very small and very limited around what's required to get through gates and the check boxes and mandatory items that are required to pass through. If we're having a look at an additional tool set, looking at working through a canvas-driven app, similar process. We go through a stage and gate process here where we step through each of the different approvals. We can track what's been done and track what the approval happened in the background. Again, this looks like more gates, but actually all we do is a business case approval, a schedule baseline, this gets into execution, and then we close out. So it's almost only a 2-gate process. So our advice is always to keep this simple. When we do add a lot of functionality and a lot of dependencies and checklist items in here, this is an area where it's a high configuration item, and the maintenance on this going forward is often very complex as well. So I always advise against this, but we always seem to go down this rabbit hole of implementing crazy stage and gate processes into the tool. Now, whilst I do understand that by systemizing this, it can help the PM know what's coming up and what they have to get through a gate. Again, this is what the PMO should provide their highest level of value in doing the QA checks at that gate process. Whilst we can put prompts here for the PM to do it, I can tick off that all my issues are resolved, but the PMO should really still be checking off to make sure the issues were resolved successfully and they haven't just been closed in the system. So there's still the QA part that the PMO should provide on top of what we try to systemize, and we shouldn't rely or assume that the PMs have done this correctly as they pass through these gates. So I've seen checklists in different gates of 100+ items with multi-stage approvals and sending things for different types of approvals where you can have rejections or part approvals and partial approval to progress through the gate. It just gets crazy what we do. When we come to reporting and we look at what this information provides us, I need to have a look at this one. So we do want to see the project sitting in the right phase at the right time. We obviously want to avoid where we've come from, where projects will skip ahead to consider themselves in execution and have not done the due diligence to get to that point, and they aren't ready to start off in the execution phase. So ultimately do want to avoid that situation. But in our reporting process, when we have a look at analytical reporting in Power BI, and we look at all the different stages we have and try and find where projects are up to in those different stages, we can use this to our advantage to say, what is currently sitting there and what is the status of that? In this particular view, we're looking at our total cost, so looking at our cost allocation to project moving throughout the different stages. We're looking at a benefit profile and effort for the different elements as well. Most of the time, the executive group will be more interested in what's currently in execution, how they're going, and how they're tracking against cost, benefit, and effort. But they also may be looking at new things coming through the pipeline from different categories, so our run, grow, transform categories. And as we get to an initiation and a selection profile, we may have a board meeting or a steering committee meeting to decide which projects should go through and when they should progress through that next gate. So there are definitely times when this is valuable to make sure everything is in the right place. However, to have the gate process systemized and to have a huge configuration to try and automate that process, the only value you are adding to this report is to say that the product is in the right place and sitting in the right phase. This can equally be done by a simple drop-down menu in your project page for the PMO to control to say, yes, this project is now allowed to be in execution. And we've gone through our framework, and we do have the documents and checklists that are required for the project to progress. They're just not in the tool, and we don't need the tool to stop or hinder our progress through the process, through our life cycle, by having too many items to tick off. And as most of you would be aware, as you do progress through, some items will not be required for some projects, some will be required for other projects, and you often find that you're working around what the system has anyway. So the most frequent time we see updates to our engagements and our solutions is to try and update what has been implemented through the stage and gate process. And I just don't find that it adds any value to the outputs or to the tracking process of projects. Where we've come from our status reporting in our last section and our importance of having regular updates for status reports, we have a huge amount of information to rely on, and looking at our portfolio overview, we have a huge data set to rely on how a project is tracking and how healthy it is to successful completion, rather than to rely on just the stage and gate process alone. So this is just an area where a lot of effort is put in defining the process and defining how the system should meet that process, whereas we should have far more useful and far more valuable information tracking this project in real time, rather than having to wait till it hits a stage gate to review and update and do quality assurance on that project. It should be a much more frequent thing done by the PMO to run these checks. So this is my number one takeaway if I have anything from here. Don't put your stage and gate framework into the tool. If you even just want to do a drop down, it's a far better option. And it's probably something that I shouldn't be telling you, because it's all my consulting time that my team will not have, as you don't ask us anymore. But trust me, we don't want to do it either, because it doesn't provide that end value to you. The second point I have in my things to avoid is to having too much data on our PSR and our product status report. So we did run through how a product status report process should work, and our out-of-the-box product reports look like some of the ones I've shown you through either a printable version, which looks like this. Doesn't matter which tool you're working in. We have another one that looks like, I need to be able to see behind this. Let me just give it a second. So a product status report, we have a whole bunch of information coming through, and we can show different types of pages. So from a project Power BI perspective, we can look at a page that looks like this, which we saw earlier. we try and limit the information that we capture on these reports so that it, again, removes that burden from the PM to maintain that on a frequent basis. Everything that we display on these reports that should go to stakeholder groups to give an accurate view of how this project is progressing, it should be at a high level to give a high-level view of how the progress is going and to find areas where there's trouble and to be able to address that. But by adding too much information to these reports, you add that burden back onto your PMs to make sure it's all accurately maintained. And from an executive perspective, those report readers, they don't have the time to walk through this and to consume the whole thing. They need some high-level takeaways from this and to know where to focus their attention. So our printable versions we do still maintain focus very much on high-level traffic lights. We do still put some commentary in there. We do recognise that you have to have some context behind your update so you can give some guidance text. We have some key dates, financial tracking. Then from a risk and issue perspective, I always like to use risks as an example. We only include 4 columns in our status report. So we really try and keep it simple. I've seen some status reports that have their whole risk register displayed in the status report. It just doesn't add any value to the recipient to be able to consume that information, and they won't need to make informed decision based on this particular report. They want to find that there's a high risk item. So in this case, we've got some risks which are past their due date. And to ask, and from an executive perspective, ask the PMO to follow this up or to dive into this further to find out where this project is going wrong and if it is off track or what they can do to help it get back on track. By adding the entire risk register, it's not adding any further value in terms of trying to resolve the individual risks. They're just having too much information to consume. So we want to make sure that it remains high level, a dashboard view, that the PMs know exactly which key information to update on a regular basis, and that it does flow through to be able to show at a portfolio level. So it doesn't matter if it is in our Power BI view or if we are looking at our portfolio view. You see here from our dashboard view, we are only taking 1 line per project. So it has key traffic lights, a percentage complete update, and we do have a hover over for some more text behind these as well. But the key takeaway is that there's very limited information. It should be a dashboard. It shouldn't have too much data presented because the consumer just doesn't have time to work through it. So again, the takeaway should be that if you can limit the amount of information in your PSR, you will help your project group by not having that administrative burden on them, and they're more likely to update it on a regular basis and keep that information accurate. My last point of common mistakes to avoid is to not have resource requests and approvals, to not have the process of submitting a request for a resource on my project and to have that go through a resource manager and to want to have that approved as part of the resource assignment process. Now, if any of you have got to a point where you are using resource management and resource tracking to provide a good understanding of where your resourcing profile looks like, this is an end result where you want to try and push to. At Sensei, we do use this day in, day out. It's very important to us as a tracking mechanism, whether we're looking at a resource dashboard that looks like this with our list of resources and our utilization over time, or whether it's more of a high-level view of project resources where we have a look at effort completed to date and what's still outstanding, and our list of roles and roles by department, and to see what everyone has got on their plate. This is very valuable as part of a resource allocation and tracking process, but the element to add a resource request from a PM and an approval from a resource manager, I feel just doesn't add the required value that it's the admin stage of it adds to this tool. By having a second step in there to request a resource and to have that resource approved for your project, it does provide some formality to the process, but the conversation around whether you've approved my resources project or I'm still waiting for you to approve these resources doesn't really help in our overall review of our resourcing capacity and over and under allocations. As we've been discussing through the session today, by having real-time information to review and to make decisions on is much more valuable than to have a formalized process of requests and approvals of resources to give us a accurate resource profile. How we do this in Sensei, we do have a view of the upcoming period where we look at over allocations of the resource to see where they have, I might just need to refresh this one, where we have a view of the current resource profile, how their capacity is looking. If they're over allocated, we can start to level out that work. If they're under allocated, we can shift some work to that. And we can also start to look at when we can take on more work or where we should push work out to. So from my level here, I can look at I'm over allocated in the current month and I have some availability coming through in July. Very much the case for me at the moment, but hey, I think that by having a live dashboard and being able to track this in real time and either in a weekly or we do it on a daily basis because it is so important to us, is much more valuable and adds a better resource management process rather than trying to rely on a formal request and approval of resources onto your project. If you do need to rely on that, it's just going to add an admin overhead in terms of updating your project resource profile. If, for example, you've submitted a request for a BA for a month, 1 week, and the next week you say, hey, that BA task shifted out of month, do you have to then go and re-request that resource the next month and start the process again? As PMs will know, the shift in resource and in project timeframes happens so frequently. If you have to readjust your approvals for resources every time, it just becomes a nightmare. So a good opportunity is to make sure that we track real-time resourcing based on schedule information, hence again why schedule upkeep is so important. Question around how do we access this availability tab. This is part of our standard dashboard. I can shout out to you later to give you an idea of where this might be allocated, part of our resourcing Power BI pack. The last, so that covers off actually the 3 common areas I try to avoid in my implementation. So first of all, and I guess, again, the biggest takeaway from today, try not to implement your stage and gate process in the tool. Don't put too much data in your PSR. It'll add too much overhead for your PMs to update it. And the last one, try not to add that resource request and approval process into your resource tracking profile. So these are my 3 highest common mistakes to avoid. If you can get away with these in your organization, you'll be much better off for it. The last section I wanted to cover quickly is an update to our reporting process. I've touched on it a few times today to have a live tracking of reports. I'll run through this quickly and I will want to leave some time for questions at the end too. So we're finding now with Power BI in particular that we're looking at a live reporting environment for projects in particular, but also all information throughout the organisation. We're trying to move away from that printed style report where you produce it during the month, you get it to a date where it's created and outputted, and then we have a point in time report that is often wrong from the point it is created. If we can get to a point where we are creating live and interactive reports through tools like Power BI, you just get a lot more value from these and you're able to interact and find the information that you need. In this particular case, I couldn't do my job as a resource manager / delivery manager if I was waiting for updates to reports every week or every month. If I needed to wait for schedule updates from my team to see how they're tracking to allocate resources, I just wouldn't be able to keep on top of my resource allocations and the consultants working on different engagements. So I needed to be real time, and we do this update this daily and review it daily. So I do have a daily stand-up. We do check in with resourcing particularly, but also project progress. And I do weekly updates for some of the bigger things like our invoicing process and our financial tracking. So whether it is from a portfolio dashboard that your executives are in trying to find more information, if they want to look at a real-time cost tracking platform, which again, if you've got actuals coming in from the finance tool, hopefully your resource and your financial tracking sheet is accurate as well, gives you really good insight into the organization and how you're tracking from a financial perspective. In terms of our other style of reports, Again, if we're having a look at where resources are up to and things like task tracking on project milestones, to be able to come in here and find for a department, for example, the IT department, what are their projects working on, a particular project manager, for example, what has Tina got on her plate? We can quickly find information that is relevant to that person. If you're starting at the top level, so executives, a particular project sponsor may only be interested in projects that are allocated to them. So they don't want to see 100 different projects in the list. It's not useful to them. They can come in here and find information that is relevant to them and allocate to what they're actually looking for. And from here, again, the point is that you can use this to find areas that you want to address and to resolve problems and dive in to find more information. So I can find the project status report behind this and actually have a look at things like how my financials are going, where everything is up to in this particular project, to give a good view and to be able to find that information and have it at my fingertips, rather than having to wait for PMO to create those big Excel workbooks and publish them on a schedule. So at the end of the month or once all the costs have come in, to be able to have this live and real time is really game changing. I think we're seeing this more and more through definitely from working from home, not being able to print reports anyway, and not being able to distribute them in a hard copy. We are seeing everything becoming electronic. I do understand there is still a need for things like printable reports to send out to stakeholder groups, but also that we are much more reliant now on the entry of information through the tool, capturing this through a standardized process, and then being able to show these reports and to show from a project level how we're tracking up to a portfolio level, and to make sure our executive group have a real-time view of how projects are progressing and to find problems before they occur. Ultimately, our end goal, just to come back to where we started, our PMO hopefully trying to deliver successful projects, our PM group having to track their projects in an accurate and realistic view every day, every week, every month, and to be able to make sure we are delivering our projects successfully. That's everything I wanted to run through. I understand there's a lot that we went through here. We will make this information available to you after the webinar. We'll send out a recording and we'll have the slide deck available for you. As always, if you wanted to have a run through of any of our products, happy for you to get in touch with us. But I do want to leave it open for any questions. So just want to throw it open. I see there's one in the chat I can jump into, but also any other questions, let's just see. So Ashan, how does the system allow to keep track of historical monthly project updates if the reporting is real time? Sometimes it's beneficial to refer back to historical progress commentary to understand project progress. Yep, absolutely. So historical project reporting, obviously, yeah, when we do point in time reports, we can save them and have a history of reports. We often find that there is key information that is particularly useful to track on a regular basis, and this is where we try and get our trend reporting to have a focus on this. So from a project perspective, we're hoping to have things like our status updates logged each time to make sure that our key traffic lights are maintained. Again, we touched on this to see a trend over time, hopefully in the right direction, to making sure we're getting to green and it's not getting worse over time. In terms of maintaining the full data set, I do agree we don't capture everything for the project at every point in time. If you think about the data set that you would maintain for that, it would just be enormous to have every data point for every project at every point in time, or even weekly or monthly. There are ways we can implement snapshot solutions so we keep extend what we do capture on a point in time and to save that away and to start doing trend reporting against this. So we had a bit of a look before at where we see trends for a project coming through. We get to have a look at indicators like our down arrow. So this one, our KPI for our project overall status has gone worse this month. So we're now going, it's got worse from amber or green to red. And we can see as some of our other traffic lights have got worse as well. So this would be something of concern, and we want to make sure these are going up rather than down. Thanks, Ashan, for the question. Was there anybody else who had anything?
Phil, we also had a question which came through from Simon. How much value is there in building logic in the calculation of overall project KPI or the individual risk, schedule, change, or deliverable project KPIs?
Yeah, cool. No worries. So when we talk about an overall KPI, we are looking at, is this project healthy or not? And so in this case, we have a red traffic light, we have this as troubled. So there is something going wrong and we need to action something for this project to get it back on track and to allow it to be successful. When we look at calculated KPIs, we often try and put a lot of business logic and rules into how it might give us better insight to whether this is off track or on track, when realistically the best input for that will be the PM's view themselves, and usually a subjective view of just allocating green, amber, or red. We have done it a lot of times. We put logic behind any red traffic light means an overall red traffic light, any amber means amber, and so on and so forth. There are a lot of algorithms we can put together, but realistically, again, you're spending a lot of time and calculations to try and prompt the project to tell you what you should be trying to find out through a better information set. So the PM may not enter these traffic lights, and the quality assurance from the PMO needs to chase that up. Part of that project status report process I walked through, making sure at least there is something allocated to each of these different traffic lights and on a monthly or weekly basis. So make sure they are regularly maintained. The visibility in the tool means that if you do miss one, it's easy to pick up. So that's something you can maintain that. I don't find the value there for trying to automate these traffic lights. You're just trying to replace what the PM should be doing as their day-to-day role. Hopefully that answers the question.
So Phil, you could have two approaches then. I'll simplify the question. You could just let PMs choose whatever they want, red, amber, green on drop downs, or you could have a really simple basic calculation. Do I interpret your question is, if you've got a good PMO that's functioning and checking how the project's going, giving the PMs just a drop down is your leaning towards your preference? Is that a fair understanding?
It typically has been my preference. We've started to aid this process in some of our tool sets by doing some advice. So as you go in to make a status update, based on the data and based on the sets of information that the rest of your product is capturing, this is what we think your traffic light should be. So it gives some advice and guidance to the PM, and they are still able to make and update this to what they think it actually is. So I do agree with you that it's easier sometimes to take it away from the PMs that based on the data, this should be amber and they can't just put everything as green. But yes, if you do have a properly functioning PMO, they should be able to run their accurate quality assurance checks on the project list to make sure these products are being reported correctly and that they are in fact on track or they are meeting the requirements of these traffic lights. I know PMs love to have a guide to say, what does amber mean? Realistically, it should just be a shout out that something is wrong and I need some help with something. And we often get into this situation where red and amber is so bad they don't want to touch them, but we should be positioning it that I need some help and I need to get this product back on track. So hopefully that's a much better and more constructive process to walk through with your PM group.
Thanks, Phil.
No worries. That's everything I had time for, so I want to hand it back to Alice. Thank you everyone for your attention today. It's been really great as part of this session.
Thank you all for joining us today. If you do have any more questions, just as we've run out of time today, please continue to send them through and Phil and myself will get back to you on some answers there. You will receive a link to the recording later today for this session, as always, and please feel free to fill out our feedback form. We really want to make sure that we're creating the most value for you guys, so please let us know what you'd like to see and we'll try to create sessions based around that. If you haven't already, please be sure to head to our website and sign up for our next few webinars. Next two are focusing on Microsoft Project, and we then have one focusing on user adoption within your PM solution. So please feel free to sign up for those. Thanks to Phil, and thank you to you all for staying on, and we'll catch you next time.
Thanks a lot, everybody. I hope to speak to you soon.